trickle in here and I'll do my introduction, and nobody really cares about that anyway. So we'll get that out of the way as we start, and then I'll turn it over to our speakers. So welcome. This is the first webinar in our Dairy Foods Innovation at Cornell webinar series. The series is designed to introduce folks to the dairy ecosystem here at Cornell that makes New York the best place for dairy foods innovation. Our focus for today's webinar is on highlighting the strong dairy producer focused programs here at Cornell and how they form a comprehensive framework which is essential to supporting New York producers for producing a supply of consistent, high quality raw milk that's supplied to New York dairy manufacturing industry and is vital to dairy food innovation. As I said, our webinar will be recorded and we will post it to our Dairy Foods Extension website after the event. Louise has everybody muted and there will be opportunities for questions at the end of the presentations. So feel free to type your questions into the chat box at any time. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So our first speaker is Dr. Tom Overton. Tom has a BS degree from Cornell University and an MS and PhD degrees from the University of Illinois. Tom is recognized widely for his research and extension efforts relating to nutritional physiology of the transition dairy cow. He serves as director of the statewide Pro Dairy Extension Program at Cornell and recently served as the associate director of agriculture and food systems for Cornell Cooperative Extension, where he worked to build additional regional agricultural specialist extension teams and strengthens several college level extension programs. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and let Tom take over.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm going to jump right in, and then I'll be followed by my good colleagues, Drs. Verkler and Neidem. So I'm going to share screen. All right, because that's what we know how to do now. All right. All right, one sec here. What do you see, Nicole?
We see the speaker view, so not the presentation. Or yeah, the present. It's not the presentation. It's your slides. There we go.
Okay. What do you see now?
That looks great.
See slides? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. No, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead with just a little overview of the New York State dairy industry, and then focus on the program that I direct, and then Paul and Daryl will jump in and talk about the program that they've been very involved with over time as well. Both programs really focused on farm level outcomes and production of high quality milk in an environmentally and economically sustainable way. So just a quick overview here of New York State dairy industry. This is the most recent data that I was able to get from Ag and Markets, showing production per cow and total milk production in New York State from 2009 to 2019. And you see both of these are growing, right? So our milk per cow has grown over time, but our total state milk production has grown over time as well, from about 12 something billion pounds to just over 15 billion pounds of milk produced statewide. Cow numbers have stayed fairly flat at between 620, 630,000 cows in New York State. And that's in 2019, that was about 3,800 farms. We're down a few hundred farms from that right now, but so about 3,500 farms right now. But again, we have growth in the industry. Just looking at some changes by state. So this is state rank for total milk production. Of course, California, Wisconsin, Idaho, New York sitting here at 4th. And this just shows total milk production 2009, 2019, and then change in total milk production during that time frame. And as you see here, if you do the math, we've had about a 22% growth in milk production in the state during that time. So again, we continue to see growth in milk production in New York State. Have some data here from the Ag Census if you're curious on the distribution of farms in New York State. This is just the number of dairy farms by herd size in 2012 and 2017. And this is by cow numbers per farm. And so you see that at least by farm numbers, right, we still have lots of farms in the smaller size categories, although that number is declining from 2017 to from 2012 to 2017. And we continue to have, certainly a fair number of farms in the larger farm size category. Okay, if you look at distribution of milk sales, and this would be a proxy for total milk production by farms, you see a little different story in that the vast majority of milk sales are coming from farms that are 500 cows plus in New York State. And again, those have certainly grown in these two categories between 2012 and 2017. So continue to see consolidation and also expansion in the dairy industry, and that again accounts for the increase in milk production. Well, Cornell's got a lot going. I mean, New York is dairy, so and Cornell has a lot going on relative to dairy. We've got programs like ProDairy that I'll talk about, FarmNet, FarmLink, or mainly FarmNet now. Some programs that are out of food science, focused more on the processing side and dairy foods innovation. We've got environmentally focused programs, business focused programs, the Quality Milk Production Services program out of the Veterinary College that Paul and Daryl will talk about. Milk quality improvement out of food science. More programs that are economically focused or focused on ag workforce and leadership, as well as a robust Cornell Cooperative Extension, a regional specialist system or educator system across the state. We train a lot of students in animal science. Our Cornell Dairy Fellows undergraduate program is the most comprehensive interdisciplinary undergraduate dairy management program in the U.S. Emphasis on integrating dairy production management with business management, and really using New York dairy farms as the classroom for a lot of what we do, and really integrating in again the production and the business analysis. And again, we expose our students to lots of things and teach them or train them to be the future leaders of our industry in New York, other parts of the Northeast, and frankly all over the country. So Cornell, CALS, CVM, the vet school in New York State. I'm remiss, Daryl and Paul, for not having CVM in the title there, but Cornell has invested also in capital and infrastructure to support dairy. We have a new research dairy farm, a relatively new research dairy farm located a few miles off campus. We have a teaching dairy under the vet school. But certainly is open. Both those dairies are used heavily by faculty and students, both in animal science, or both in CALS and in the vet school. So certainly vet school researchers do research out at the dairy a few miles off campus. So there's lots of collaboration and work together between faculty here. And then, again, simultaneously, almost a new dairy processing plant and food science building next door to where my office is, again, by New York State and CALS. Okay. Here's our quick photo of a research dairy. Again, we're pushing, I guess, 8 years old now plus. We have lots of capability in terms of doing both pen-based research with cows and also individual, more intensive type work as well to really understand what's going on in the biology. Okay, got a couple cow shots in there, parlor. And then again, highlighting, give a little forecast. I think Nicole and others are going to be talking about some of the cool things that really do go on within Stocking Hall relative to dairy processing and innovation on that end. So that'll be your teaser here for future webinars. All right, I'm going to talk about ProDairy more specifically, and again, that is, I consider it to be one of our flagship programs within the College of Ag and Life Sciences, relative to focused on farm level outcomes through educational programs and applied research. And it's been around now for 30 plus years. So the program was started in the late 1980s and has been funded continuously by Ag and Market, New York State Department of Ag and Markets since that time. So, our mission is really focus on economic development through competitiveness and sustainability, and through applied research and education. Okay, and again, we are focused on farm level outcomes. So we work directly with farms, but then we also work a lot with those that work with farms. So most farms have a nutritionist, have a veterinarian, have a banker, or somebody extension, somebody in other parts of allied industry that supports that farm. And we rely heavily on educational programs also targeted through those multiplier type audiences, because we figure if we can influence what they do or improve what they do, they're going to work with their farms, and it's going to ripple through the system. Okay. So lots of objectives, right? We want competitiveness, profitability, sustainability of the New York industry. We are certainly focused on management skills and knowledge, right? Because people manage people. It's still people that get the, we have increasing use of robotics in different ways, but at the end of the day, on dairy farms, it's still people that really make it happen. And so that's pretty important. We link faculty and staff research programs to extension, and then we leverage alliances with agri-service and our extension system. Again, as I mentioned, we were funded directly from and through the Department of Ag and Markets here in New York State. We provide leadership for, actually it's Dairy Advancement Program. Sorry, we modified the name and I forgot to update the slide. And we'll talk briefly about that. And we get additional grant and donor-based funding from a number of different sources in New York State. So, and beyond, New York Farm Viability, USDA, NYSERDA, which is our energy that funds a lot of renewable energy type work. We're very grateful for some more recent funding from Chobani to support some business planning type efforts and things like that on farms. So again, that's been a great relationship there. You don't need all the nuts and bolts, but again, our core programs funded at 1.2 million, and then we get some additional monies for what's called, again, the Dairy Advancement Program that I'll mention briefly here in just a little bit. So our core themes for the program are really focused on, are centered around farm business management, business development, environmental stewardship, and renewable energy. So cropping and dairy management systems, and then youth and professional development. So again, all those are kind of 4 pillars anyway of the program. Here's our staff. This is way too many words for, or way too much for a slide. But again, we have critical mass in the business side of the program. We have critical mass in the environmental side. We're currently hiring a nutrient management environmental sustainability specialist, for the program. One of our engineers, Kurt Gooch, is actually on leave to Dairy Management Inc., and he's working on the National Net Zero Dairy Initiative. So he's working at the national level. So again, we provide leadership in lots of different ways. Rob Lynch on the cow well-being side at Dairy Herd Health. And again, a number of other specialists here, and I'll highlight a couple of the programs. So some of the things we do some larger conferences, right? And these are just some things that either recently happened, unfortunately virtually, right? But we're gonna be live and in person for our Northeast Dairy Management Conference in early 2022, and we'll actually be live with other conferences here in the fall, as opposed to trying to continue to do stuff solely over Zoom. So these will be large conferences focused really for dairy producer attendees and allied industry attendees as well. We also offer some very specialized programming. Our dairy executive program that Jason Karsis leads is really focused on management and leadership at the farm level. And so we really attract some of our most progressive producers from not only the Northeast, but across the country into some of these programs, and they're highly impactful. Okay. We also we started doing online courses in 2017 before online was cool, and so we've now developed a number of courses in collaboration with others, that we offer focus for dairy producers and herd managers. But we also find that allied industry professionals take those too. Just calf and heifer management, forage management, other courses both in English and Spanish. Milk quality course that really is mostly conducted by the Quality Milk Production Services. Again, Paul, Daryl, and their team heavily involved in doing that. But again, these have been quite popular, been very well received, both before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and hopefully now after the pandemic. Although, thank you, Delta. So, Junior Dairy Leader, right? One of a flagship program within Pro Dairy. Is focused on orienting high school age youth to career opportunities in the dairy industry through exposure. And this program has really turned a lot of young people on to careers in agriculture, and it really has been a game changer amongst a lot of different youth. If you look at some of the stats here, 98% of graduates continue their education after high school. 85% attended college to study agriculture. And about half of those were kind of uncertain or not intending to before they got exposed to the program. So it's been a great program for us over time, and that continues. And then again, we do communications as well. We have a Manager Insert and Progressive Dairy magazine, and these are all available. That they're mailed to basically every farmer that we can track down in really New York and Vermont. It's also included in the Eastern section of Progressive Dairy Magazine. We do monthly or more frequent, depending, newsletters, you know, and with really highlighting upcoming events and New York State specific, really dairy industry things, right? We're not trying to duplicate what other, I mean, lots of us get lots of email from lots of different sources, and we're trying to be a little customized in terms of how we do it. So lots of stuff on the web. Got a lot of webinars recorded in English and Spanish, again, focused on farms and their employees, okay? And again, the manager section here is available online as well. So through our Cornell Pro Dairy website. And of course, like everybody else, we hopped in on COVID. We're quick off the gate between Pro Dairy, and then Rich Stupp is the leader of our Cornell Agricultural Workforce Development Program, and a lot of information, especially in the early days of the pandemic, as people were trying to figure out how to keep workforces safe. You know, information about COVID. You know, guiding to resources, guiding to some of the you know, how do you navigate some of the tumultuous times that we had in the weeks and months following the outbreak or following the initiation of the pandemic. And then again, you know, I talked about the Dairy Advancement Program. You know, this is really focused on business and environmental planning. Okay, and so, you know, this is really targeted toward smaller to medium-sized farms. And so these are farms that would be unlikely maybe to engage the services of a private business consultant. And so this funding provides some cost share funding to do that for farms. And so we continue to have money from New York State to do this. It was this program that for several years, Chobani, you know, supplemented the program, the funding that we had from New York State, which was really, really valuable. And so we appreciate them for that. And then there's also environmental project or planning funds as well. Those come from the Department of Environmental Conservation. So again, a lot of detail on this slide, but a program that's really got a lot of popularity amongst farms, especially our smaller to medium-sized farms. Just a map here of projects. This is just, you know, again, a lot of projects here in Western New York and Southwestern New York, a bunch here in the central part of the state, and then certainly a number here in Northern New York as well. So just giving you a sense for statewide level activity on this. And then the New York industry also likes to kind of organize work groups, and often Pro Dairy, and frankly, Paul and Daryl have been part of a number of these groups before as well. But you know, these are, when I say work groups, it's groups usually made up of you know, farmers, people in allied industry, people from Cornell, you know, maybe some others from Extension, and then people from state agencies at different times, right, relative to or Farm Bureau, Northeast Dairy Producers Association, so our farm and ag organizations. So, you know, CAFO work group related to environmental, you know, environmental stewardship, providing input into environmental sustainable, animal well-being work group, Ag Workforce Development Council, dairy issues, cow power. You know, that one's, you know, again, works to try to really educate policy relative to renewable energy, especially in dairy. And again, we have you know, Partners for a Healthy Watershed here in the Finger Lakes area that again seeks to do some educational things and help to orient relative to, you know, how farms and environments interact. And again, as I said, we have these colored square or colored areas all represent regional specialist teams in dairy, livestock, field crops. We actually, this is a slightly older slide. I wasn't able to get an updated one. We do have a Southwest team now, and so, you know, these teams really live, you know, where the cows are, and so, you know, again, we have that extension network across the state as well. They're working with our farms too. And then I think in my last slide here, we have also maintained a dairy center of excellence across really the College of Agricultural Life Sciences, the College of Veterinary Medicine. Again, Daryl also very involved in the leadership team there, and College of Engineering and our Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management. And so, you know, again, we have forums to connect those of us at Cornell that work in dairy, and again, you know, very robust portfolio of expertise that we have. So I think, Nicole, that is my last slide. I'm going to stop sharing. And I'll turn it back to you, and we can either do a question or two now if there are any, or I'm happy to hold it. We can do them at the end as you choose.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we have a few minutes, so I will go ahead and let anyone who has a question ask a question at this point. You can either unmute, you can put your question into the chat box, and while you're figuring those things out, sometimes it takes me a few minutes. Tom, how many farms overall between all of these different programs that you talked about are supported in New York by the various programs?
You talking just Pro Dairy? Or you talking all the programs?
So Pro Dairy and the various components of Pro Dairy.
Yeah, we think that we directly or indirectly reach probably 80 to 90% of the milk produced in New York State.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we tend to look at it, right? Because it's not going to be, those dairies, the ones that have 1 to 9 cows. I doubt we reach very many of those farms, right? Now, maybe we do through different things, but of course they're not, they're a tiny fraction of the milk supply anyway, right?
Right.
And so, and again, we've had, the dairy, because that dairy advancement program is really the business planning funds are focused toward farms of under 300 cows, right? That's given us a new avenue into those farms, and we've got hundreds of projects, in farms of smaller size with programs like that.
Yeah, that's great. Do you see anything more that could be done to target those small producers that isn't currently on the agenda?
Yeah, well, I think, again, I think the business planning one is big. I think and of course, a lot of the business planning things involve generational transfer as well, right? Because these are multi-generational farms, and so, I think, just because the current parents took the farm over from the grandparents doesn't mean that's necessarily the exact right thing for the next generation to do.
Right.
And so those involve, you want that next generation to be successful in that. And so the business planning is really important, but also, programs like FarmNet also do nice work in some of these areas. And, again, back to, succession and things like that. And so we tend to also, a lot of the succession work is also done in the private sector, right? Because there's legal things that come into play that kind of fall out of the scope maybe of educational programs, but certainly we can help be part of that whole mix.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Any other questions for Tom before we move on to our next speakers? Okay. If not, thanks so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yep. Okay, so our next speaker is, our next two speakers are Dr. Paul Virkler and Dr. Daryl Neidham. They're going to give their presentations back to back, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity for questions if there are any. So as a way of introduction, Dr. Virkler was born and raised on a small dairy farm in Lewis County, New York. He attended Cornell University, where he obtained both his BS and DVM, and then spent 7 years as a cattle veterinarian at Attica Veterinary Associates in Western New York. He subsequently worked at De La Valle as a technical services veterinarian covering North America, and then the Animal Health Diagnostic Center and the Veterinary Support Services Unit. Currently, Paul's working as an extension veterinarian for Quality Milk Production Services, where he provides science-based advice to dairy producers and their veterinarians as an integral part of their udder health and milk quality teams. He also teaches milk quality related courses and is involved in ongoing applied research in the area of udder health, milking equipment, mastitis, and milk quality. And then Dr. Neidham grew up in New York State as well, where his grandparents owned a small farm and his father was a practicing dairy veterinarian. He earned a BS in biochemistry from the University of New York, Geneseo, and a DVM at Cornell. While living in Vermont, he entered private clinical practice and eventually came back to Cornell for a PhD in epidemiology. Currently, he's a professor of dairy health and production in the ambulatory production medicine at Quality Milk Production Services sections, as well as faculty director for the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Paul, who's going to start off, and then he'll turn it over to Daryl.
Excellent. Good afternoon. Seeing my slides all right, I assume. Okay. We're going to start out just with a little bit of introduction and definition here to quality milk. Quality milk is a program within the vet school, and it stands for Quality Milk Production Services. It actually was established in 1946. At the time, the governor, Thomas Dewey, had a herd of cattle, and he started to have some challenges with milk quality. He called up the New York State College of Veterinary Medicine. They went out there, and actually, interestingly enough, it was one of the first applications of penicillin to food animals. It was post-war, and so they were starting to use this. At that point, the disease was curable, cured his herd, and he stated at that time that he wanted this service offered and available to all New York State farms. So since that point, that's been part of our mission. And here you see some of the pictures through the years of different services that we've offered. We are still we're part of the Animal Health Diagnostic Center at the College of Veterinary Medicine, and we're within the Population Medicine and Diagnostic Sciences is the department we're within. So we have, kind of like Tom illustrated here, we have a kind of a 4-pillared mission as well. We operate laboratories to do milk cultures, but we also culture a lot of other different samples coming from the farm, towels and bedding, and other samples to do with calf health. We have a very active field service. So that's actually field meaning out onto the farms. We're out onto the farms every single day. And we also offer education programs to all sorts of segments of the dairy industry, and we'll cover a few of those at the end. And as well, we do applied research and trials that are ongoing. And I'll cover a few, and Daryl will highlight some of our other trials that we've done through the years. So we have 4 different laboratories across New York State. There's a laboratory in the Northern Lab, which I'm out of, is up in Canton and services that northern pocket of dairies that Tom highlighted there. We have a lab in Eastern New York out of Cobleskill. Dr. Mike Zurakowski is out of that laboratory. Dr. Rick Waters is out of our Western Lab, servicing that pocket of dairies out there in the Western New York. And then our central lab, of course, at the Ithaca office, where we have 4 veterinarians there that are servicing the farms around that central area, as well as heading a lot of our research programs out of that office. So out of the other offices, each one has a laboratory where we do the microbiology, as well as field staff, and we run courier routes out of each one. So this is just a graphic here highlighting different farms where we hit our courier routes. So Daryl is going to highlight more of this program later, but this would be farms where we go to their farm, pick up a milk sample, and we're helping those farms with either diagnosis of mastitis or diagnosis of bulk tank samples. And again, looking to help, our whole goal is focused here on prevention of mastitis, improved milk quality, improved animal well-being. And we're kind of the boots on the ground out there in terms of there. And that's why we have the 4 regional labs, so that we can easily reach those farms. This morning, 4 in the morning, I was out on a farm, and we can get to those farms, do our assessments, and help those farms. So I'm going to highlight just 4 basic programs within. I mean, we have a bunch of others, but these are probably our main programs. What we call our whole herd survey when we go out to the farms. There's a milk and center evaluation program, which I'll get into a little more detail, a bulk tank program, and then our wash-up analysis. As we think about mastitis on farms, just a quick slide to take you into just a hair of the details. We look at various aspects. So from herd and farm management, which would be the stalls and what's going on with the cows, the milking machine, of course, as we harvest the milk has an influence. The cow themselves, right? The genetics, the nutrition, the other factors that are related to the cow, the immunology of the cow, and then milking management, as Tom alluded to. We're still heavily focused on the people that are harvesting our milk and how they influence our milk quality. We spend a lot of time in that area and training, and you'll see a lot of our research as well is focused in that area. So when we go out to a whole herd survey, we're going to collect samples primarily looking for contagious mastitis. Contagious would be, as we kind of know easily now with COVID, but it's passed cow to cow. And there we're going to collect aseptic milk samples from each cow, perform cultures on them, and then go back to the farm with the results and a report and sit down with a discussion and help the farm move forward in terms of eliminating contagious mastitis. Again, with the focus on improving the milk quality coming off our New York farms. As well, we'll look at the milking procedures, so what they're doing and how they're harvesting the milk, and check the milking equipment at that time. The photo here is just a quick shot. This was a large herd actually, because we do this primarily on our smaller herds, but this was a large herd. We sampled 2,500 cows in a morning there, and looking for the control of mycoplasma mastitis on this dairy. Help them, and since that point, they've eliminated it from the dairy. So our second program focused again on all size farms. You know, we go to all of those farms. Earlier in the week was on a farm, you know, with the 10 cows. So we certainly hit all farms, and that's part of our New York State mandate. Is anybody that calls us, we're going to. So and one of the things that we've learned is to be collaborative. As Tom said, when we go in there and help farms, we're going to work with their team that's on the farm. And we're going to try to help encourage the communication between the different players and hold farm meetings to help that communication happen. And so the players in that might be the milk inspector, right, the herd veterinarian, certainly the equipment dealer, who's ever selling them supplies for the teat dips and stuff like that. And all of those, we'll try to bring them together, have a central discussion, talk about the data, and try to establish a clear plan for that farm moving forward. And what we find with that is, as we do that, we come up with these opportunity areas within the farm that may not have been noticed before. And it really helps jumpstart the farm, move them forward. And in some of these farms, right, the next day they see a dramatic difference in their risk of mastitis on that dairy. And the second thing we've learned is to go back to these farms and help them over time, because otherwise the cycle just kind of cycles back if we don't keep going back and help bringing that team together and keep them moving in the same direction. And that's one of the things that is a strength of our program, as told to us by the farms, is you're out here, you're helping us, you're keeping us on track. We know when you're coming back, and we know we got to have our stuff done. And again, that, you know, repeating that data really just helps develop their strong data set so they know their trend line. It also helps them to you know, not look for that silver bullet or that single thing. As we showed you earlier, mastitis is multifactorial, right? And so it very seldom that one small change, such as a change in a dip or something, is going to make that large of a difference. It really is approaching it from all have objective data. So what do we measure? Again, too much detail on this slide, but just to give you an idea, right? So we're looking at it from the equipment side, we're looking at it from the people side, and we're looking at it from the cow side. And we have a whole standard set of evaluations that we do. It's what we were doing this morning on this farm. And out of that set of data, then we're going to download it, we're going to compile it, and we'll go back to the farm again, sit down at that farm meeting with the other farm advisors there and talk through it, come up with an action plan for the farm and a monitoring plan to really help them move forward in the milk quality arena. Our bulk tank program, just to spend a couple minutes on that. It's a program that we've had a couple renditions of, but currently we take samples through the bulk tank milk haulers as they're collected, and then the collection point of those samples. Every 2 months, we'll be doing a sample on a herd that's signed up for the program. And we're primarily looking again for contagious mastitis, so a proactive step here, trying to prevent it so we know it's there and then get on top of it rapidly. And again, aimed at helping the animal well-being so that less animals would be affected if we detect it early. And each of these reviews, one of the QMPS professionals out of their lab looks over the records, again, looking at the somatic cell count and all the other records from the farm, trying to spot stuff before it becomes a problem, and writes a brief report and sends it back to the farm. another way just to keep in touch and stay on top of the farms and help them to stay on top of their programs. So next point, we're just going to go into a couple of different applied research here, some of the field research. Up there you can see some of our funding sources. So we get funding from all over and seek funding and apply for grants from all different sources. And one of the things to highlight here, right, is because we're in New York, because we're working, and most of the research, of course, we're doing is on New York farms, the New York farms benefit first, right? Because we're there, we're doing that research with them, we highlight it to them, and because we're on the other New York farms, right, we're talking about that research that's ongoing. For instance, right now we have a program that we're looking at string sampling and how we can predict what's going on at the cow level, and phenomenal data from that that's funded by an industry partner and really helping us to understand it much better than we ever had. So this was a grant we had. This is Northern New York Ag Development Grant. So a program up here in Northern New York for the 6 counties in Northern New York, specifically focused. It's, you know, you apply for this as a grant program. And the grant for last year, we developed an e-learning program that was aimed at a niche that we saw, or a lack, I guess I would say, of training for farm level employees, so milkers basically, on how to troubleshoot problems with the milking equipment. So we developed an e-learning module, both in English and Spanish, and went out to the farms, went through it. We had 95 employees on 15 farms that completed this training. And after the training, as a questionnaire and as part of the e-learning module, 95% of the workers stated they would be able to check the milking equipment prior to milking after completing this training. So again, we feel like we're hitting the farms, helping these farms so that their employees are better educated. Another thing out of this grant, there was a big hole in terms of the communication between milkers and managers about milking equipment problems. So out of the grant, you can see a picture there. We developed a specific whiteboard that's aimed just at milking equipment problems. We trained on it, and now the employees can use that and put those problems on the board and help managers understand. Just highlighting another study here. This was a little more scientific and detailed study. All of these studies are coming again from New York farms asking us these questions. So that's where we get the ideas, is farms wanting to know the question. This question was, can we improve our milking by both faster and safer for the cows? In other words, get units off quicker so there's less risk of teat damage by changing the automatic takeoff setting. So on farms, as a unit, it senses the flow rate, the milk flow rate in this, and you can set the set point so that you set it for the flow rate that it takes the unit off a cow. So this study, we randomized cows by just simply changing only that in the takeoff setting. So these cows are all out there, they're all commingled. The only thing that's different is when they come into the parlor, they get ID'd, and by their ID, the code is set. So one set of cows, the flow rate comes off at 1.8 pounds per minute. A second, pounds per minute. Then we run this trial. We ran it for 57 days to look at the difference between these two. And what we found was that increasing that takeoff setting, we saved unit on time. We decreased the risk of short-term teat damage. So in other words, less mastitis, again, preventing better milk quality, better animal well-being, so less kicking at the end of the unit with the unit on the cow with no milk flow, and had a neutral effect on milk yield, so no loss in milk, and no differences in terms of the risk of mastitis. So again, happier cows here, an economic gain for the farm by quicker with no negative health benefits. And of course, we published these studies. This was published in Journal of Dairy Science and is out there for peer review. Last is an ongoing grant. We're still in the middle of this. This is looking at the robotic milking or automated milking systems. AMS is the acronym for these. And what the grant is focused on, trying to help develop better algorithms to allow this robot to more accurately predict and detect subclinical and clinical mastitis. And There's a group of us on it, both from CALS and the vet school. So another collaborative grant that we're involved in. And again, what we're looking for is an increased accuracy, earlier detection of this mastitis so that we can intervene earlier, so that there's less inflammatory damage to the cow's udder, and that we're intervening and solving our problems earlier. And that's really what this grant is about. And the design of it there is in the pictorial, but we won't. And lastly here, just my last slide here, just talking about the educational programs. So certainly ongoing programs to educate all parts of the dairy industry, just like Tom said. I mean, we have as well, teaching the undergrads to vet students, certainly a lot of programs for dairy producers out there as well. We do a fair amount of milk inspector training, equipment dealers, so milk and equipment dealers, that segment of the industry. We partner with a lot and do a lot of training. And then certainly we're out there educating veterinarians as well on milk quality and mastitis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daryl, and we'll take the questions at the end.
Thanks very much, Nicole, for the previous introduction. Thanks for teeing that up really well, Paul. I would take the liberty, if anyone's got a burning question for Paul that you think you might forget, you could toss it out there right now. Perhaps, spur us into some more creative thinking or something. If you're just saving them up, I'll grab my shared screen here and we'll move along. All right, did I get into presentation mode for you guys? All right. Well, I'm going to do a little bit of science here, but the science I'm going to talk about as related to what Tom was talking about, what Paul was talking about, most of our science that we do comes often from observations we make out in the field. And we're out on the farms, we're doing our routine preventive work, and sometimes we co-create ideas with the farmers, the veterinarians, and the other agribusiness professionals we're working with. And we take it side in Cornell and we get some grant money and we do some science. And then we kind of turn that back into end user applied things. It's sort of a nice cycle of life. I was explaining this to my kids once and they said, yeah, that's kind of like Lion King. And I found that pretty heartening that, my young kids at the time could relate to this, and that we're, identifying problems in the field. We're taking it through a cycle of rigorous science and then returning that information back to the field again. And as Paul mentioned, we're doing this stuff on farm in New York. So our New York farm dairies and families, they benefit from this stuff right out of the gate. Most of it's, frankly, they're a good idea. Someone once asked me where I get my good ideas, and I said, I've actually never had a good idea. I've just taken them all from farmers. And then, I learned how to do some science, and there we go. So target-based udder health programs is something I've been talking about and working with our quality milk production services group for quite a while. And it sort of comes out as we should with all those things that Paul talked about preventing mastitis. But it goes all the way back to Governor Dewey. Sometimes cows just get an intermammary infection and we need to react to that. And heretofore, whether it be for treating clinical mastitis or treating subclinical infections at the end of the lactating period going into the dry period, we pretty much use blanket therapy because, one, the ecology of pathogens was different, and two, the antimicrobials we had were pretty effective. But as we've moved through time, the ecology of pathogens has changed some, and our public is ever more concerned that we prudently use antimicrobials in a targeted way. So we'll talk quickly about two things. One, pathogen-based treatment for clinical mastitis, And then at the end of my little segment here, we'll talk about selective dry cow therapy. So why might we want to do pathogen-based treatment for clinical mastitis? Well, we're all in the dairy business, so we want to make more money, but we also have an oath to do this while not compromising animal health. So we can save some money on tubes, that would be antimicrobial tubes, the intermammary tubes used, and perhaps labor if we can judiciously and selectively treat the right cases. We're going to have better hospital pen density if we don't have as many treated animals, right? And we can all agree, right? The hospital is the last place you want to be. You want to be out in your home pen or in your home, right? As an industry, we've done an excellent job decreasing the risk of antimicrobial residues in bulk milk sold off the dairy. But if we use less antimicrobials, we're going to have even a further decrease in that risk. And there's the ever-present boogeyman, which can take on the forms of legislation or just consumers or even sometimes retailers telling us we have to do this in a more prudent way because of fears of antimicrobial resistance. And ultimately, all of these things will allow us to sell more milk, right? Good quality raw milk off the dairy. So here's an example of what was going on in a farm. We were at a local dairy about 20 minutes up the road here, and we were talking about how they reacted to clinical mastitis. And the farm asked us the question, well, right now we're treating every single case of mastitis the same, but we're sending to your lab at QMPS all of these cultures, and you send us back very rapidly an answer. Well, let's make use of that data and see if we can not treat some of these cases that are going to not respond to antibiotics or where the cow's immune system is going to take care of it, right? So we wanted to target antimicrobial use to those cases where it's going to benefit the cow, right? So we put together a team of local practitioners, people working at QMPS, people from the software industry, and graduate students, and we did some science. We got some grant money, published it in Journal of Dairy Science like we should. And what we've built up from this, and I'll go through some of the data from this trial and then the example of how this is built up. But we provide this service now for over 75,000 cows, probably up to 100,000 cows in New York with this pathogen-based treatment program we have here. So when we're doing this pathogen-based treatment, right? Remember that slide Paul showed where we have all those dots where those couriers go out to dairies, okay? As an example, in the central lab here, we have couriers that go out to farms 360 days a year and pick up the milk samples and return them to the lab. And then we return the results back to the dairy via the internet, and it goes right into their computer where it helps them drive a treatment protocol. And in concert with a veterinarian of the record on dairies, they've devised these protocols. So here are the results from one of those trials that we did. Pathogen-based, which means selectively treating. So if there's not any particular growth or an E. coli, we're not going to treat those, okay? And we are still going to treat some of the streptococcal infections, for example. And we compared that to blanket therapy, treating them all right away. And you can see here in this graph, there's no difference in clinical days, that is how the milk looks abnormal, or milk production after this, or even linear score, which is a proxy log-based transformation of somatic cell count. And in fact, numerically, most of the time, it turns out it's a little better when we don't give all the cows antibiotics, but only give cows antibiotics when they're going to benefit from it. Not only is this biologically beneficial, you know, we've done some partial budget on this and worked through this with different dairies. It turns out that investing in some diagnostics, waiting about 24 hours for those diagnostics to come back, and then selectively treating the cows that are going to benefit from the antibiotics versus immediately treating them all with blanket therapy, turns out to be about $30,000 per 1,000 cows. Or if you had a 1-cow dairy, that'd be $30 per cow. Or this dairy we did this first trial on was a little better than a 3,000 cow dairy. They realized an increased annual cash flow of over $100,000 a year from investing in some diagnostics while prudently using antibiotics. So in summary, this pathogen-based treatment, right? Decreased milk withholding times by about 3 days, right? We get those cows in and out of the hospital pen quicker with no meaningful differences in how that milk looks, the clinical cure, mastitis, linear score and somatic cell count, and culling, while decreasing the use of antimicrobials by about 65%. So over half. Pretty meaningful change in antimicrobial use while supporting the well-being of the cows and the economic well-being of our New York dairy farms. All right. Upside, over $30,000 per 1,000 cows. So we run that courier service around and pick up milk samples, but even with 4 labs across the state, right, we can't get someone to all of those. Tom told us there's over 3,000 farms in New York right now. We can't get to them. So we also train people on how to do on-farm culture as well, right? Paul said we have a big army of veterinarians, technicians, and PhDs that can get out on the farm and train people how to do on-farm culturing and then pathogen-based treatment, even if they can't send samples in to Quality Milk Production Services or work with their reference lab. But if you do have the ability to jump on our courier service, we've got some pretty fancy technology, a big laser called Multitof, where we can very accurately and timely return results. We can also do this with biochemical tests, but just to show that we're up to times with fancy technology in our labs as well. So here's what this QMPS 24-hour, 7-day per week service looks like. A cow might get mastitis, right? If we fail in our prevention, and remember, prevention is always first, but cows still get mastitis. The milk sample gets taken. That event is entered into the computer. Then the courier comes by, picks up the data as well as that milk sample. We accession it in the lab, and then the kind of bacteria, the pathogen result, is reported back in 24 to 36 hours after the pickup, which then drives a protocol for the farm to follow. And they could be using, for example, dairy count 305, dumps right in there. So here's a little picture of this. To limit errors in cow identification, we want to get that electronic ID onto a USB stick. And then here comes our courier, driving pretty fast all around the state, picking up the data, picking up the milk. We bring it back to the lab. Mastitis, milk microbiology magic happens. 24 hours later, we push that result back out into the iLoop. It lands in the on-farm computer where herd management, in concert with their veterinary of record, has put together a protocol to treat or not to treat cows depending on that pathogen answer. And then we've worked really hard with our partners, for example, at Valley Ag Software, to build this out so it's very usable, right? Remember, we had a farmer idea, we did some Journal of Dairy Science published research, and now this stuff is available in Dairy Comp 305. And you can see this cow's 6893. She gets entered in when she has mastitis. We can tell when the sample gets to the lab, and then 24 hours later, it gets put on her cow card, what the answer was and what to do with that cow. So that's where I kind of wanted to end with pathogen-based treatment of clinical mastitis, right? Remember that we can support the economic well-being of New York dairy farms by doing this while supporting the well-being of the cows in addition. So the other end of the spectrum, right? A lot of clinical mastitis happens at the beginning of lactation. At the end of lactation, when I was just a young veterinarian, the mantra was blanket treatment of dry cows, right? Every quarter of every cow got a long-acting antimicrobial because the average cow had an existing subclinical infection or might acquire one, right? But now we're in a little different place, and we might want to move now to selective dry cow therapy, again, because it might be economically beneficial to the farms, and we also want to preserve animal health in doing so. Again, we might be able to save money on tubes and labor, decrease risk of residues, mitigate any risks of antimicrobial resistance, and ultimately sell more high-quality milk. As I mentioned, back in the 60s, blanket dry cow therapy was a thing to do, and I pretty firmly believe it was the right thing to do at that time to treat and control mastitis because we had more contagious types of mastitis and average cows had a subclinical infection. So this isn't all the way back to the 60s, but even back to 1999, okay, across the country, average somatic cell count, right, was about 300,000. If we use a cut point of 200,000 as an intermammary infection, okay, the average cow might have had an intermammary infection, subclinical, and it probably didn't make sense to sort out the ones that did and didn't have it. But as we go forward here in time, right, now, present day, through good animal health practices, the average somatic cell count is well below 200,000, right? So in the history of recorded udder health, never been better than it is today. So maybe we can target antimicrobial use at the end of the lactating period, this dry cow stuff as well, right? And when we even look at cultures at the quarter level, as recently as 1985, 75 to 95% of the cultures were free of infection now, and back in 1985 was only like 44%. So we've come a long ways in udder health management. So again, we were at a different farm this time here in Cuyahoga County, and Paul and I were actually there. We were doing our normal survey stuff, and the farmer asked us, he said, you know what, we have pretty darn good udder health here. And we think the more we mess around with the cows at the beginning of the dry period, we actually put them at higher risk. So he said, help us come up with a method for which we can treat less of our dry cows with antibiotics, so we don't have to mess with them, right? We're still going to use a teat sealant, but we want to find out what cows are at low risk for intermammary infection. So again, we went out and found some New York farm viability money to study this, and took that farmer idea inside Cornell, partnered with a farm that wanted to do some applied research, published it in Journal of Dairy Science rigorously, and now we've taken this back out across the state, in fact, across the country again. So we did this study where we randomized low-risk cows to getting intermammary antibiotics and a teat sealant or teat sealant only, while treating all of the high-risk cows still, right? Antibiotics still kill bacteria. That's good, and we want to preserve that function. So we want to decrease the use prudently in low-risk cows. Turns out that good herds that have got their udder health in a place to adopt something like this typically have half to 2/3 of their cows are going to be low risk. So probably not needing an intermammary antimicrobial at the end of their lactating period to preserve udder health. And you can look through this treatment trial here, right? Abxts means antibiotics plus a teat sealant. That's the dark line, and the red line is just a teat sealant only. Milk production in the subsequent lactation, not lower, and in fact, a little bit higher in those low-risk cows where we only put the teat sealant in, right? Not giving them an antibiotic did not hurt their milk production, right? Nor did it hurt their risk of a new infection, their linear score, somatic cell count, the risk of survival, or their risk of having a new clinical infection. So we moved on and took this to a nationwide study, did some more randomized on-farm field trials, again, including different New York herds here, published that in Journal of Dairy Science. And you can see here, we got some New York herds as well as some Midwest herds and some West Coast herds. And what we found out there, again, is that we can decrease antibiotic use at the dry period by about 55% without hurting cures, new intermammary infections, milk production, or intermammary infections post-calving. We put this through the economic ringer as well, and it's not as economically beneficial as the pathogen-based treatment, but we put this into a sophisticated stochastic partial budget, ran it 50,000 times, which means if we did this like on 50,000 herds or for 50,000 cows, and every single one of those iterations was positive, economically positive. Some of them a little bit positive, some of them more positive, but none of those scenarios that we tried through the sophisticated model were economically negative. And as you can see, it was biologically just fine for the cows as well, while supporting prudent antimicrobial use. So we want to find herds that are ready for this to be used. And it's those herds that have good milk quality already. And there are lots of those herds in New York. And as I mentioned, we want to take this out to make it available for lots of herds. So we've again worked with industry software partners to get this simplified. So it's in on-farm software. This is an example of what you might find in Dairy Comp 305 for selective dry cow therapy. And on dry day, it comes up with a list, right? So you can find, for example, cow here, 3136. She is an N, so she's not a high-risk cow. She's not going to get an antimicrobial at dry off. And then 2620, you can see, right? She's got a Y for, yes, she is a high risk. So out of these 15 cows on this example dairy, right, we're only going to treat 1, 2 cows with intermammary antimicrobials compared to if we had treated them all. And we've followed this herd up also. We have built in monitoring tools, and udder health is preserved there. So I think, like our residue study, right, and our somatic cell count work, we're making great strides in prudent antimicrobial use to address consumer concerns across the New York industry as well. So that's where I'll end this on a happy note.
Thanks so much, Daryl. Does anyone have any questions for Daryl or Paul? Maybe I'll actually just start out, because I'm wondering if you see any pushback from producers. It sounds like both of the programs that you are describing, both selective pathogen treatment as well as dry cow therapy, there doesn't seem to be any, negative part of doing that. Do you see any pushback from producers, or what are barriers that you could run into to implementing these programs?
Great question, Nicole, because there are barriers and there is pushback sometimes. And part of it is cultural, I think. Blanket dry cow therapy, I don't think we as veterinarians have been as good at getting compliance with anything through the history of veterinary medicine as getting every quarter of every cow treated, because it worked really well. So now we just have to increase the awareness that we're in a different place with dairy management now, right? Udder health has never been better. We can approach antimicrobial use differently. And it is sometimes, even just management-wise, difficult to treat one and not the other, as opposed to just putting it in them all.
Right.
So a lot of opportunity for improvement, though.
Okay.
Great question. Great question.
Yeah, and on a pathogen-based treatment of clinical mastitis, Nicole, what I just comment quickly on is the management structure within a farm. So a lot of times ownership would be totally on board. Is for the middle management person is accepting either that they no longer are making those decisions, one, or two is that they're comfortable that ownership is wanting them to actually make the decision based on the pathogen rather than, and that they're not responsible if something bad would happen. For some cases, right, they end up over-treating in a sense to try to prevent anything bad from happening.
Okay.
Response.
Sure. Or, I can imagine the concern that the worry that the animal is going to be negatively impacted. Ultimately. Yeah. Yep. So we do have a question in the chat box, and I think this could go to either Daryl or Paul about the high SCC greater than 200,000 and what the impact is on colostrum, if it's going to cause an issue in colostrum.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So, naturally in colostrum, the somatic cell count is higher. So we wouldn't use that standard for a colostrum sample. So that would be for a normal milk sample. So we know, just again, because right in colostrum, we're allowing for a lot of immunoglobulins and other particles to come into the colostrum to help the calf health. And so that's a natural thing. So we wouldn't use the 200,000 to assess on a colostrum base there. Now, of course, if the cow has clinical mastitis at the time of calving, and that's in the colostrum, that is definitely going to impact quality. There's no question there. Though each farm would assess that colostrum, they'll assess the cow, strip the cow out before they harvest that colostrum. So they should notice that, and that colostrum would then be discarded. So, but very good question.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions? I did have one more. Paul, for you on the e-learning project that you worked on, is that are those modules still available? Do you plan to expand those at all? Because I think that sounds like a fantastic resource for producers.
Yeah, yep. They are available. We're actually changing platforms to make them even more available.
Okay.
Our previous platform, we kind of, I would call it an annoyance in some ways to get into it easily.
Okay.
So our new platform, what it's going to allow us to do is essentially just send the link to people, and then they're in it, so the farms are in it as the farm workers would come in it, because the thought process behind this, right, would be, one, it allows farms to actually track that their employees have done training, so they can prove it. And, oh, this employee's done this training. And within the modules, we have knowledge check questions, so they can also show that they understood up to as much as the online format would allow you to do that. So the equipment training one was phase 2. So there's a milking routine one and a milking equipment one, and both of those were transitioning to new platform. The grant, we're actually in phase 3 this year. We got the grant again this year. Phase 3 is actually totally supporting the pathogen-based treatment. So how to aseptically collect milk samples, how to administer proper intramammary treatment, how to administer teat sealants and external sealants for those cows that are being selectively dried off. So, and again, all those will be available, definitely. Yep. Fantastic.
No, that's great. All right. If there's no other questions, then I just want to say thank you so much to Tom and Paul and Daryl. We really appreciate your time. This is being recorded and will be available on our website. We do have another webinar coming up in September. The date will be released shortly, and that one will focus on the dairy foods research that happens in the food science department at Cornell and how that supports dairy innovation in New York State. I do see that one more question came in, and so I do want to, since we have just a couple more minutes, give you the opportunity to answer that. What kind of treatment can be used for a mastitic cow from the time of detection till the time of culture, if any treatment is needed during that point?
You want me to jump in, Paul, or?
Yeah, go ahead, Daryl. Yep.
Sure. I think Nicole actually answered the question in the end of her rephrasing of that question, if anything is needed at all. So from the time of mastitis detection until the time that the culture result comes back, right? If you do that quickly enough, which is, 24 to 48 hours, we have a mountain of data now to suggest that it doesn't make an impact to wait that long for the treatable infections. So I would just leave her alone, because if you do some sort of, I don't know, we'll call it voodoo medicine at that time, you probably put her at greater risk than waiting for a proper diagnostic and using, for example, in this country, an FDA approved intramammary antimicrobial.
Perfect, thank you.
A common question we often get, so not surprising.
Certainly. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time again, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Everybody, thanks, Nicole.
Thanks for everybody's attention.
Bye.
Good.
Yep.